You won't believe what happened when I returned home after 10 long years, only to find out the neighborhood HOA had taken over my land, and a Karen was pretending to enforce it. This story has everything: fake cops, stolen property, and one man's fight to reclaim what was his. Before we start, tell me in the comments what country you're watching from, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell for more insane HOA and Karen stories. When Daniel Burke pulled into the long, cracked driveway of his late parents' property, the sight nearly broke him. The house, once bright and surrounded by wildflowers his mother had planted, now stood faded and weathered, a ghost of what it used to be. 10 years had passed since he'd left the small town behind to serve overseas. Now he was back, honorably discharged, ready to rebuild, and excited to reconnect with his roots. But the first sign of trouble came before he even stepped out of his truck. A sign at the edge of the property read, "Private HOA property, unauthorized entry prohibited." His heart sank. His land, his family's land, wasn't part of any HOA when he left. He double-checked the address. It was right. This was his home. Still, confusion turned to disbelief as he noticed a group of identical beige houses in the distance, new constructions that stretched across the back acres of what used to be his family's open field. His father's old workshop was gone. The oak tree where he'd carved his initials as a boy had been cut down. And then she appeared. A middle-aged woman in a floral blouse and oversized sunglasses, strutting toward him with the authority of someone who believed the entire neighborhood belonged to her. Her name was Karen Peterson, head of the newly formed Lakewood Meadows HOA. From the moment she saw Daniel, her expression twisted with suspicion. She approached like he was a trespasser on sacred ground, waving a clipboard and shouting about violations and unauthorized vehicles. Daniel tried to stay calm. He explained who he was, but Karen wouldn't hear a word of it. To her, he was just another outsider. Within minutes, she was on her phone. Moments later, a man in a knockoff police uniform pulled up in an old sedan with flashing blue lights glued to the top. The badge was plastic, the car didn't even have plates, but Karen stood proudly beside him, introducing him as the local HOA enforcement officer. Daniel could hardly believe the absurdity of it. She'd actually brought the fake cop to his own land? The man in the phony uniform tried to intimidate Daniel, ordering him to leave the property immediately or face legal action. But Daniel wasn't the same person who had left a decade ago. He'd dealt with real law, real authority, and this wasn't it. Calmly, he pulled out his folder of legal documents. The property deed, tax receipts, and even the original boundary survey were all in his name. He'd been preparing for this moment ever since he heard rumors that developers had tried to seize abandoned land while he was away. Karen's confidence started to crack when Daniel pointed out that his land had never been annexed into the HOA. There was no signed agreement, no recorded authorization, nothing. But instead of backing down, she doubled down. She screamed that he was forging documents, claiming that the HOA board had legally taken over his plot years ago. Daniel had spent enough time in conflict zones to know when someone was bluffing. He decided to play along, for now. He went to town the next morning and pulled every public record he could find. Sure enough, the HOA's claim was bogus. They'd filed false plats and adjusted maps to make it look like his land had been absorbed into their community. The developer, a friend of Karen's husband, had accidentally built part of their homes onto his acreage, and instead of owning up to it, they created fake paperwork to cover their tracks. By the time Daniel returned that afternoon, Karen was standing on his front porch, barking orders at a landscaping crew to clear out the junk. His old furniture, some tools, and boxes of his parents' keepsakes were being tossed into a dumpster. That's when Daniel called the real police. When the deputies arrived, Karen tried to play her usual game. She introduced herself as the HOA president and claimed Daniel was a squatter. But when the officers looked at Daniel's documents and then at the fake cop in the discount uniform, it was over. The fake officer was detained immediately for impersonating law enforcement. Karen's screams echoed across the street as the real police explained that Daniel was, in fact, the rightful owner. The homes built on his property were an entirely different story. The investigation that followed uncovered not just fraud, but theft of land, illegal annexation, and falsified construction permits. The developer faced massive fines, and the HOA's leadership was exposed for corruption. Karen lost her position and became the face of the scandal. Local news picked up the story, calling it the HOA that tried to steal a soldier's land. But Daniel wasn't after revenge. He was after restoration. Over the next few months, he began rebuilding the old house. He worked long days repairing the roof, repainting the walls, and clearing the overgrown yard. Neighbors who had once ignored him started stopping by to help out. They'd heard what he went through, and many were tired of the HOA's arrogance. One by one, homeowners began voting to dissolve the HOA altogether. Without Karen's leadership and with half their members leaving, the association collapsed. The few who remained had no authority to enforce anything. A year later, Daniel stood on the front porch of his restored home, watching the sunset spill across the fields. The same land his parents had loved was his again. The same soil that raised him now held his peace. He planted a new oak tree in the corner of the yard, a promise that this time no one would take it away. As for Karen, she moved out quietly after losing her home in the legal fallout. The last anyone heard, she was living in a rental across town, still complaining about how unfair it all was. Daniel never responded. He didn't need to. Justice had already been served.